The joyous laughter that filled the room came to an abrupt halt when my 6-year-old niece pointed an accusatory finger at my son. "Grandma says Noah is the Maid'S kid, not a real Parker," she declared innocently. A heavy silence fell over the gathering before it erupted into an awkward wave of laughter. My son's small hand trembled in mine, confusion clouding his innocent eyes. Without uttering a single word, I swiftly gathered our coats and left. Later that evening, my father texted, "Make sure you send the utility payment tomorrow." I replied, "You will get what you deserve." They had no inkling of the storm that awaited them. The Christmas tree lights in our modest apartment twinkled steadily as I tucked Noah into bed. His eyes were still swollen from tears, and my heart ached knowing my 7-year-old son couldn't comprehend why his own family had laughed at him. "Mommy, what did Lily mean about me being the Maid's kid?" Noah asked, his voice small and filled with uncertainty. I gently brushed his sandy brown hair away from his forehead, buying myself precious moments to find the right words. "Sometimes people say hurtful things without thinking," I said carefully, "but it doesn't matter what anyone says. You are my son, and I love you more than anything in this world." He seemed to accept my answer for the moment, but I knew that more questions would inevitably arise. Once Noah drifted off to sleep, I made my way to the kitchen table, where stacks of financial documents cluttered nearly every inch of the surface. This was my life as the unofficial accountant for the Parker family business, a role I had assumed 5 years ago when Dad insisted they couldn't afford a professional. The Parkers, my family in name only, as tonight had painfully confirmed. I opened my laptop and accessed the hidden folder I had been meticulously maintaining for years. Call it intuition or perhaps self-preservation, but I had always maintained meticulous records of every transaction I managed for Parker Real Estate Development. Under my father Richard's leadership, the company had flourished, expanding from residential properties to commercial developments spanning 3 states. My hands trembled slightly as I sifted through the files. The truth about my parentage wasn't a revelation. I had uncovered it 12 years ago, at the age of 20, while assisting my mother, who, as it turned out, was not my biological mother, in cleaning out the attic. I stumbled upon old letters. They were correspondences between my father and Maria Vasquez, the family's former housekeeper, and they unveiled their affair and my existence. Suddenly, everything fell into place. I understood why I never truly fit in, why grandmother Eleanor always treated me differently from my siblings, Thomas and Amanda, and why I alone possessed dark hair and eyes in a family of blondes. I confronted my father in private, and he swore me to secrecy, assuring me that I was still a Parker. Yet everything shifted after that. My college fund mysteriously required me to work at the family business to earn my way, unlike Thomas and Amanda, whose educations were fully funded. When I became pregnant with Noah, there were no baby showers or support, just disappointment and judgment. Now, I found myself managing everything from payroll to tax filings, laboring 50-hour weeks for half the salary an external accountant would earn. Yet, I was still expected to express gratitude. Tonight served as a painful confirmation of what I had always suspected. I would never be truly accepted. By extension, Noah would always be an outsider as well. As I systematically reviewed years of financial records, something unusual caught my eye, a recurring transfer to an offshore account I had never noticed before. I delved deeper, meticulously cross-referencing dates and amounts. My heart raced as a troubling pattern began to take shape. For over 15 years, my father had been systematically embezzling funds from the family business. Initially, the amounts were small, but over time, he grew bolder. Based on my calculations, the total now exceeded $3 million. But that wasn't all. As I scrutinized the tax documents I had prepared using the information Dad provided, a chilling realization dawned on me. I had been unwittingly filing fraudulent tax returns, reporting an income that was significantly lower than the actual earnings. The revelation struck me like a physical blow. Not only was I being exploited and disrespected, but I was also being used as an unwitting accomplice in his deceit. If this ever came to light, I could face criminal charges, all because of my ignorance. My phone pinged with another text from Dad. "I'm serious about that utility payment, Florence. The company account needs the funds transferred by noon tomorrow." The utility payment was our coded reference for the monthly cash infusion. Dad had claimed the business needed this support to stay afloat during slow periods, but now I understood that these funds were likely flowing directly into his hidden accounts. I stared at the message, a cold resolve settling over me. For years, I had swallowed my pride, enduring their treatment for Noah's sake, convinced he deserved to know his family, despite everything. But tonight had changed everything. When Lily innocently echoed Grandmother Eleanor's cruel words, the facade shattered completely. They would never accept Noah as a true Parker, and now I realized they were not only morally corrupt, but criminals as well. I closed my laptop and made a decision. Tomorrow would indeed bring them what they deserved, but it wouldn't be the money my father was expecting. "Mom, are we still going to Grandma's for New Year's?" Noah asked over breakfast the next morning. I placed a plate of blueberry pancakes, his favorite, buying myself a moment to gather my thoughts. "I'm not sure, buddy. We might do something special, just the two of us this year," I replied, striving to keep my voice light, not wanting to burden him with adult concerns stemming from what Lily had said. His eyes, so strikingly similar to mine, watched me intently. Even at 7, Noah was perceptive, perhaps too perceptive at times. I sat down across from him, partly to share in the moment, but also because I believed we deserved our own special celebration. Did I do something wrong? Is that why everyone laughed? His innocent question pierced my heart. "No, Noah, you did absolutely nothing wrong. The grown-ups were being unkind, and that's why we left. I won't let anyone be unkind to you, even if they're family." He seemed to accept my words, focusing instead on drowning his pancakes in syrup. I allowed it, fully aware of the inevitable sugar rush that would follow. Today, we both needed whatever small comforts we could find. After dropping Noah off at school, I drove directly to the office of my only true friend in town, Jane Wilson. I had met Jane, an attorney, 3 years ago during a charity function. Unlike the social climbers who frequented Parker events, Jane was refreshingly genuine. Our shared love for obscure indie films and hiking quickly forged a strong friendship. Jane's receptionist ushered me straight to her office. One look at my face prompted Jane to close the door behind us. "I saw you leave the Parker Christmas party early. What happened?" I sank into the chair across from her desk and recounted the previous night's events, including my unsettling discoveries about the family finances. Jane listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly troubled. When I finished, she leaned forward. "Florence, this is serious. If what you found is accurate, Richard could face significant jail time for tax fraud and embezzlement. There's also a risk that you could be implicated, given your role in the company finances." "I know," I replied quietly, "but I can prove I was simply working with the information provided to me. I've documented everything." Jane nodded thoughtfully. "Smart, but Florence, are you sure you want to pursue this? These people may be awful, but they're still your family." "Are they?" I asked bitterly. "You know, I've never told you the whole truth about my relationship with the Parkers." I took a deep breath and began to explain how I had discovered I was actually the daughter of Maria Vasquez, the family's former housekeeper. I recounted how she had an affair with Richard while working in their home, and how she mysteriously returned to Mexico when I was 5, leaving me behind. All these years, I've tried to belong, to prove my worth, but now they're dragging Noah into it, making him feel less than. I won't stand for that. Jane's eyes widened with each revelation. That's a lot to process, but it actually makes your legal position more interesting. She tapped her pen against her desk, contemplating. "You mentioned utility payments you made for the family?" Yes, monthly transfers from the business account to various personal accounts. Dad always claimed they were legitimate business expenses, but now I'm convinced they're part of the embezzlement scheme, and I have documentation. Years worth? I nodded. Hold off on making any transfers for now, Jane advised. I need to research a few things. In the meantime, gather every document you can. And Florence, be careful. People who've gotten away with fraud for this long can be dangerous when cornered. After leaving Jane's office, I chose to ignore the 6 missed calls from my father as I drove to my apartment. I needed to find something, anything, that might provide more insight into my real mother. At the back of my closet lay a small wooden box I had kept hidden for years. Inside were the few possessions of Maria's that I had managed to salvage: a silver hairbrush, a faded photograph of a young woman with my same dark eyes, and a small prayer card inscribed with Spanish writing. It wasn't much to show for a life, but these items were my only connection to the woman who had given me life. As I held the cherished items, memories flooded back to the day I confronted Richard about Maria. His face had drained of color before he quickly composed himself into a mask of authority. Yes, it's true. Maria was your biological mother, he had admitted, but Patricia raised you as her own. We adopted you properly when Maria decided to return to Mexico. You're a Parker, Florence. That's all that matters. I had been so shocked, so desperate to belong somewhere that I accepted his explanation without question. Now, I found myself wondering what had really happened to Maria. Why would a mother leave her child behind? As I examined the box more closely than I had in years, I noticed the bottom felt uneven. Pressing the edges, I discovered a hidden compartment. Inside was a sealed envelope addressed to Heha Florence in delicate handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it and began to read the letter my mother had written over 25 years ago. As the truth unfolded before me, tears streamed down my face. Maria hadn't abandoned me. She had been deported after Eleanor discovered the affair and reported her undocumented status to the authorities. Richard had promised to send me to her once she was settled, but he never followed through. To make matters worse, Maria had written that she saved every penny to leave me an inheritance, entrusting it to Richard until I turned 18, an inheritance I had never received. The letter concluded with coordinates and a bank name in Arizona, revealing where my mother had established a trust in my name. The final blow came when Maria explained that despite Richard's assurances, he had never legally adopted me. According to her, he had only listed himself as my father on a new birth certificate, but had never completed the formal adoption proceedings. If this were true, it meant not only had Richard stolen my inheritance, but I also had no legal connection to the Parker family at all. Just then, my phone rang again. It was Richard, undoubtedly furious about the delayed transfer. This time, I answered. "Where the hell is the money, Florence?" he demanded without preamble. "I've discovered some irregularities in the accounts," I replied calmly. "I need to sort them out before making any transfers." "What irregularities? You don't need to review anything. Just make the damn transfer." "Actually, I do. As the person whose signature is on all these financial documents, I have a responsibility to ensure everything is legal." There was a moment of silence before his voice turned threatening. "Don't play games with me, Florence. You work for me, remember?" "Do I? Because according to the paperwork I've seen, I'm not even legally your daughter. So what exactly do I owe you, Richard?" I hung up as he began sputtering, a strange sense of power flowing through me. For the first time in my life, I held leverage over the Parkers, and I intended to use it. The morning, I called in sick to the family business and met Jane at her office. I brought everything with me: the financial records, Maria's letter, and my birth certificate. Jane examined the documents with great care. "This is quite a paper trail," she finally said, her brow furrowing. "If what Maria wrote is true, then Richard never legally adopted you. This means you've been working under false pretenses all these years, and this inheritance issue is clearly theft. Can we prove it? Jane nodded slowly. With some investigative work, yes. We'll need to check the trust information in Arizona and verify your legal status. But Florence, once we start pulling these threads, there's no turning back. The Parkers will fight dirty. I'm counting on it, I replied grimly. They've already started. I showed her my phone, displaying texts from various family members. From Thomas, Dad's furious. Fix this before you regret it. From Amanda, what's wrong with you after everything the family's done for you? Even my mother, Patricia, who had raised me believing I was hers, had texted, "Please call your father. He's very upset." Not one message had asked if Noah and I were okay after what had happened at Christmas. I'm ready for whatever comes, I told Jane, but I'm worried about Noah. He doesn't understand what's happening. Has he asked more questions? I nodded. His teacher called yesterday. He got into an argument with another boy who said families don't leave Christmas parties early. Noah got upset and replied, "Some families aren't real families." Jane reached across her desk and squeezed my hand. Kids are resilient, but you should be prepared for this to get harder before it gets better. Consider talking to a child psychologist who can help Noah process this. I will, but first, I need to secure our future. If I was going to confront the Parkers, I needed to ensure that Noah and I would be okay, no matter what unfolded. Over the next week, Jane and I meticulously built our case. We confirmed that the trust in Arizona indeed existed, established by Maria Vasquez for Florence Vasquez Parker, with a current value exceeding $200,000, money that should have been transferred to me upon my 18th birthday. We also verified through county records that no formal adoption had ever been processed. On paper, I was Florence Vasquez, the daughter of Maria Vasquez and Richard Parker, but I had never been legally adopted by the Parker family. The evidence of financial fraud was equally damning. Working late into the nights after Noah had gone to bed, I compiled years of bank statements that revealed a systematic diversion of funds, falsified tax documents, and records of property transactions where money mysteriously vanished between the sale price and what was reported to investors. I was deep into this work when a loud knocking startled me. It was nearly 10 o'clock at night. Noah had been asleep for hours. Cautiously, I approached the door and checked the peephole. Thomas stood outside, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. I opened the door but kept the security chain engaged. "What do you want, Thomas?" "Let me in, Florence. We need to talk." He slurred slightly, the effects of alcohol evident. "It's late, and Noah's asleep. Whatever you have to say can wait until tomorrow." He leaned against the doorframe, frustration evident. "Dad's going crazy, you know. He says you're threatening to destroy the family after everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" I repeated incredulously. "Like what exactly? Treating me like an outsider my entire life? Using me to manage your finances for half of what I'm worth? Allowing your mother to call my son the Maid'S kid?" Thomas's face darkened. "You're being dramatic. It was just a stupid comment," he retorted. "And let's be honest, Florence, it's true. You are the Maid'S kid. We took you in, gave you the Parker name when we could have sent you to Mexico with your mother. Is that what happened? Because I'm beginning to realize that your version of history isn't very accurate." Thomas tried to push the door wider, but the chain held firm. "Listen to me carefully," he hissed, all pretense of familial concern evaporating. "Stop whatever you're doing. Stop looking into old accounts. Stop asking questions about your mother. Stop causing trouble, or things will get very bad for you and your bastard son." A cold fury surged within me. "Are you threatening a child, Thomas? My child? I'm giving you good advice, sister." He spat the last word like it was poison. "Dad's got friends in this town. Judges, police, CPS workers. How hard do you think it would be for him to make a case that you're an unfit mother? Get out," I said quietly, "and don't ever come to my home again. You've got 24 hours to make the transfer and drop whatever scheme you're cooking up. After that, all bets are off." Thomas pushed away from the door and staggered down the hall. I closed the door, double-checking all the locks, my hands trembling with rage and fear. I wanted to call Jane immediately, but hesitated, glancing at the clock. Instead, I sent her a text requesting an urgent meeting first thing tomorrow. Then, I went to check on Noah, standing in his doorway, watching him sleep peacefully, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around him. I made a solemn promise to myself. No matter what it took, I was determined to protect him, and I would seek justice, not just for myself, but for Maria as well. The following day brought another startling revelation. Following a lead from Maria's letter, Jane and I uncovered that grandmother Eleanor had been directly responsible for reporting Maria to immigration authorities. We discovered old correspondence in county records where Eleanor had written to officials alleging that Maria had falsified documents to secure employment. This wasn't merely about money. It was about erasing Maria from existence, taking her child and exploiting her vulnerability, all while constructing their real estate empire on the backs of other vulnerable workers, many of whom were undocumented, just as Maria had been. As I delved deeper, a troubling pattern emerged. Parker Real Estate Development had a history of hiring undocumented workers for their construction projects, paying them far below market rates and threatening deportation if they dared to complain. The family fortune wasn't just built on fraud, it was constructed on exploitation. With each revelation, my determination intensified. This wasn't solely about Noah and me anymore. It was about every individual the Parkers had trampled on during their ascent to wealth and status. By the end of the week, I had gathered enough evidence to potentially ruin the entire Parker family. But I was acutely aware that they wouldn't go down without a fight, and their first strike came sooner than I anticipated. The initial sign of retaliation occurred on Monday morning. As I attempted to buy coffee on my way to drop Noah off at school, my card was declined. Confused, I checked my banking app and found that all my accounts had been frozen. The joint business accounts I managed made sense. Richard would have authority there. But my personal checking account had been frozen too, along with my small savings account. I called the bank immediately and was informed that a fraud alert had been placed on all my accounts, pending investigation. When I inquired about who had initiated the investigation, the representative hesitated before reluctantly admitting it was Richard Parker, listed as a co-signer on my accounts. A co-signer? That was impossible. I had opened these accounts myself when I was just 22. But as I pressed for more details, the horrifying truth unfolded. Years ago, when I first began working for the family business, Richard had insisted that I use the family's preferred bank. He claimed he was helping me set up the accounts to secure favorable terms. Apparently, he had also added himself as a co-signer without my knowledge. In a panic, I called Jane. "They've frozen all my accounts. I can't access any money." "They're getting desperate," she replied grimly. "But we anticipated this. Remember the emergency fund we set up last week?" Jane had insisted I open a new account at a different bank solely in my name and transfer a small amount of money, just enough to get by for a few weeks if things went south. "Yes, but that's only $3,000. My rent is $1,800 and it's due next week, plus utilities, groceries, and Noah's after-school program." "We'll figure it out," Jane assured me. "In the meantime, I've contacted the trust in Arizona. They're sending verification documents about your inheritance. Once we have those, we can move to unfreeze your accounts." But the Parkers were just getting started. That afternoon, I received an email from my landlord. Apparently, there had been multiple noise complaints about my unit, and he needed to discuss my lease. When I called him, he was evasive, mentioning he'd received concerns from influential parties about my tenancy. Richard's reach was extending further than I had anticipated. 2 days later, while I was picking up Noah from school, his teacher requested to speak with me privately. "Mrs. Anderson called today," she said, referring to Amanda's wife. "She requested to pick up Noah after school tomorrow." I explained, We can only release children to authorized individuals on the pickup list. My blood ran cold at the thought. Thank you for following protocol. Noah is never to be released to anyone but me unless you receive explicit instructions directly from me. The teacher nodded, her discomfort evident. Of course, but Mrs. Anderson was quite insistent. She mentioned there were some family concerns about Noah's home environment. What does that mean? I demanded, my heart racing. I'm not sure, she admitted, but I thought you should know. I thanked her and left with Noah, my mind swirling with anxiety. They were laying the groundwork for something much bigger, possibly a custody challenge. When we arrived home, I noticed something on my car that I had missed earlier. Someone had keyed the driver's side door, scratching the words "Maid's kid" into the paint. I quickly positioned myself to block Noah's view. Hey, buddy, why don't you head inside? I need to check something on the car. Once he was safely in the apartment, I examined the damage more closely, taking photos for evidence. The deliberate cruelty of the act made my hands tremble. These people were my family, at least they had claimed to be for 27 years. That night, Noah came into my room, tears streaming down his face. Jimmy said I can't come to his birthday party anymore. Jimmy was Amanda's son. Did he say why? Noah wiped his nose on his sleeve. He said his grandma told his mom that we're not really related, so I can't be at family parties anymore. I held him close, feeling fury and heartbreak warring within me. Jimmy's grandma is wrong about a lot of things, I said softly. Being related isn't just about blood. It's about who loves you and who you love. Then why are they being so mean? I had no good answer, so I simply held him tighter, wishing I could shield him from the hurt. The next day brought the most direct attack yet. A formal-looking envelope arrived, containing a notice of intent to sue for custody. Richard was claiming that as Noah's grandfather, he had standing to seek custody due to my so-called unstable behavior and unfit living conditions. The allegations were outrageous. Substance abuse, neglect, exposure to inappropriate individuals, completely fabricated. I called Jane immediately. They're going after Noah. This was the nuclear option, she said after I read her the notice. But it's also desperate and stupid. They have no case, Florence, no evidence for any of these claims. That doesn't mean they can't make my life hell in the meantime. What if they've bribed someone? Thomas had warned me that Richard had friends in family court. Then we need to accelerate our timeline. How quickly can you pack essentials for you and Noah? What? Why? Because you're moving in with me until this is resolved, Jane said firmly. My home has a security system and cameras. If they're going to play dirty, we need to protect you and Noah from false allegations. I'm concerned about escalation. I glanced at the damaged car visible from my window. You think they might try something worse? I think people who would threaten a child to protect their money are capable of just about anything. That evening, Noah and I moved into Jane's guest bedroom. I told him it was a fun sleepover with my friend while some repairs were being done at our apartment. He seemed excited by the adventure, blissfully unaware of the real danger lurking beneath the surface. The next blow came when my boss called. Jackson Freeman owned the accounting firm where I worked part-time when I wasn't managing the Parker family business. Florence, I've received some concerning information about potential impropriety, he began awkwardly. Let me guess, it's from Richard Parker, I interjected. Jackson sighed. He's a major client, Florence. He's claiming you've stolen company documents and committed some kind of fraud. And you believe him? I don't know what to believe, but I can't have this kind of cloud hanging over the firm. I'm going to need you to take a leave of absence until this is sorted out. Just like that, my secondary income vanished. That night, after Noah was asleep in the guest room, Jane and I reviewed our options. The Parkers had moved faster and struck harder than we'd anticipated. They had attacked my finances, my housing, my reputation, and now they were threatening my son. "We need leverage," Jane said decisively. "Something so damning that they'll back off immediately." I opened my laptop and navigated to a folder I hadn't shared with Jane yet. I've been saving this as a last resort. It's documentation of the Parker family's labor practices. They've been systematically exploiting undocumented workers for decades. Dangerous working conditions, wage theft, threats of deportation. Jane's eyes widened as she reviewed the files. "This isn't just civil liability, this is criminal." "Yes, and there's more," I replied, showing her what I'd discovered just that morning. Evidence that the Parkers had specifically targeted Maria for deportation, not just because of the affair, but because she had begun documenting the company's labor violations. Maria hadn't just been my mother, she had been trying to expose the Parkers' exploitation. "This changes everything," Jane said quietly. "Florence, with this evidence, we can approach federal authorities. This goes beyond family court," Jane stated firmly. Just as we were discussing our next steps, a text message arrived from a number I didn't recognize. "Florence, this is Lucia Vasquez, Maria's sister. I've been looking for you for many years. Please call me." My heart stopped. After all this time, another link to my mother, just when I needed it most. I called Lucia Vasquez immediately. At first, skepticism crept in. It could have been a trap set by the Parkers. But as soon as I heard her voice, so similar to the one I remembered from my earliest childhood memories, I knew she was genuine. "Me, Sabrina," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "My niece, I have searched for you for so long. How did you find me now?" I asked, still cautious despite my instinctive trust. "A lawyer contacted the bank in Arizona about Maria's trust. The bank had my information as a secondary contact. They couldn't tell me who was asking, but I knew it must be you. No one else would know about that account." We spoke for nearly an hour. Lucia confirmed everything in Maria's letter and added details that made the Parkers' actions even more despicable. When Maria was deported, she didn't just leave behind her daughter. She was 7 months pregnant with another child by Richard, a baby that didn't survive the stress of deportation and inadequate medical care. "Maria never recovered from losing both her children," Lucia said softly. "She tried for years to contact you, sending letters to the Parker house that were returned unopened. She saved every penny to build that trust for you, hoping someday you would find it. When did she pass away?" I asked, my heart heavy. Tears streaming down my face. 10 years ago, cancer. Her last words were your name. The knowledge that my mother had died alone, still clinging to the hope of reuniting with the daughter stolen from her, filled me with a grief so profound it was physically painful. Yet, beneath that sorrow lay a steely resolve. The Parkers would pay for what they had done, not just to me, but to Maria. Lucia had more to offer than just emotional closure. Maria had kept journals, detailed accounts of her time with the Parkers, including the labor violations, the affair with Richard, his promises to her, everything. I have them all. Those journals could be the final piece of evidence we need. We arranged for Lucia to fly from Arizona to meet us as soon as possible. But the next morning brought another crisis. A caseworker from Child Protective Services appeared at Jane's door, explaining that they had received an anonymous report of child endangerment. "We're required to investigate all reports," the woman explained, apologetically, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, especially when they include allegations of substance abuse around a minor. Jane, ever the attorney, took control. "My client is happy to cooperate, but I'll be present for any questioning. And I should note that we've already documented a pattern of false allegations from family members currently engaged in a custody dispute." The caseworker conducted a cursory interview, observed that Noah was clearly well cared for and happy, and indicated she didn't see any immediate concerns. However, the investigation would remain open while they completed their process. As she left, Jane pulled me aside. "This is good, actually. The caseworker clearly saw through the false report. Her documentation of Noah's well-being will help our case." But the emotional toll was mounting. Noah, despite our efforts to shield him, could sense the tension in the air. He began having nightmares, waking up in tears, and asking if bad people were going to take him away from me. I arranged for him to see a child psychologist that Jane recommended, who helped him express his fears through drawing and play therapy. But watching my son suffer because of adult cruelty was the hardest part of this entire ordeal. The next attack came in the form of utility shutoffs. Despite my emergency fund and attempts to pay the bills, somehow services were being disconnected one by one. Electricity, water, gas, all cut off. When I called each company, they claimed to have received cancellation requests from the account holder. Jane filed emergency motions to address the financial harassment, but the legal wheels turned slowly. Meanwhile, the Parker family's public attacks continued. Rumors spread through our social circles about my mental health, my parenting, and even fabricated stories about inappropriate relationships. Former friends stopped returning my calls. Noah's school called again, this time to report that parents were requesting their children not be seated near him. The isolation was clearly the Parkers' strategy, to cut me off from support, resources, and community until I had no choice but to surrender. The pressure reached its peak when I received another legal notice. This one offered a settlement in exchange for signing away all claims against the Parker family, relinquishing any rights to family assets, and turning over all documentation I'd collected. They would drop the custody case against me and provide a modest financial settlement. The letter concluded with a thinly veiled threat. "Consider carefully what is best for Noah. Children need stability and family support. A prolonged legal battle will only harm him further." I sat at Jane's kitchen table, staring at the letter until the words began to blur together. For a fleeting moment, I considered accepting the deal. Noah was suffering, my resources were dwindling, and the fight was draining everything I had. Jane found me in that state, the settlement offer crumpled tightly in my fist. "They're offering a deal," I said. Jane read it quickly, her expression darkening. "This isn't a settlement offer, it's a surrender demand." Maybe I should take it for Noah's sake. Jane sat across from me, her gaze steady. "Florence, listen to me. If you give in now, they win everything. They'll have legal documentation of you surrendering all claims, which they'll use to paint you as a scammer who tried to extort the family and then admitted you were wrong. Your reputation will be permanently damaged. And do you really think they'll leave you and Noah alone after that? They've shown who they are." Deep down, I knew she was right. The Parkers wouldn't stop at a settlement. They'd continue to undermine my relationship with Noah, possibly seek visitation rights, and ensure I could never work in this town again. What choice do I have? They're too powerful. They control everything. "Not everything," Jane said firmly, "and not for long. Lucia arrives tomorrow with Maria's journals. The banking records from Arizona have been verified. Richard definitely stole your inheritance. And I've had preliminary discussions with the Department of Labor about the worker exploitation evidence." She squeezed my hand. "You're closer than you think to bringing them down. That's why they're pushing so hard right now. They're scared." Her words rekindled the fire that had been flickering inside me. I was Maria Vasquez's daughter, a woman who had fought against impossible odds to protect and provide for her child. I wouldn't dishonor her memory by giving up now. "You're right," I said, straightening my shoulders. "Let's end this, but on our terms, not theirs." The next morning, Lucia arrived. In her 60s, she possessed the same dark eyes as Maria and me, eyes that sparkled with tears as she embraced me for the first time. "You look so much like her. She would be so proud of you for standing up to these people." Lucia brought with her a small weathered suitcase containing Maria's journals, 6 notebooks filled with detailed accounts of her time with the Parkers. The evidence was more damning than we could have ever hoped for. Maria had meticulously documented dates, conversations, bank account numbers, and even photographs she'd secretly taken of unsafe working conditions and meetings between Richard and undocumented workers. Most critically, she had recorded Richard's explicit promise that he would legally adopt me, along with his later admission that he never completed the process because it wasn't necessary once Maria was out of the picture. With Lucia's arrival and Maria's journals, we now had the leverage we needed. Jane immediately filed emergency motions to dismiss the custody case while simultaneously preparing to approach federal authorities about the labor violations and fraud. I decided to play along with the Parkers' settlement offer, requesting a meeting to discuss terms. Richard, Thomas, and their attorney agreed immediately, clearly believing I was finally breaking under the pressure. Little did they know, I was done being the victim. The meeting was set for Monday morning. By Sunday night, our plan was in place, a counterattack so comprehensive that the Parkers would never recover. As Noah slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, I sat with Lucia and Jane reviewing every detail one last time. "Are you ready for this?" "Are you ready for this?" Jane asked. "Once we start, there's no going back." I thought about Maria, fighting alone against the powerful family that had used and discarded her. I thought about Noah, who deserved a life free from the shadow of the Parkers' cruelty. And I thought about myself, not Florence Parker, the eternal outsider, but Florence Vasquez, a woman finally embracing her true identity and power. "I've never been more ready for anything," I replied. Monday morning arrived bright and clear, a beautiful winter day that felt at odds with the storm I was about to unleash. I dressed carefully in a simple black suit, professional and unmemorable, exactly as planned. Noah would spend the day with Lucia at Jane's house, protected by additional security that Jane had arranged. He had taken to his great-aunt immediately, delighted by her stories about the mother I had never really known. "Remember," Jane said as we prepared to leave for the meeting, "stick to the script. Don't let them provoke you into saying anything unplanned." The meeting was set for 10 o'clock at the offices of Whitman and Reed, the prestigious law firm that had represented the Parker family for generations. I arrived 15 minutes early, as instructed by Jane, and was shown to a conference room to wait alone, an obvious intimidation tactic. At precisely 10, the door opened. Richard entered first, followed by Thomas and their attorney, William Whitman. Richard looked triumphant, while Thomas wore a smug expression. They clearly believed this meeting was a formality, the final surrender of a defeated opponent. "Florence," Richard nodded curtly, "I see you've come to your senses." I said nothing, merely watching as they arranged themselves across the table from me. No one asked where my attorney was. They likely assumed I couldn't afford representation anymore. Whitman placed a thick document on the table and slid it toward me. "This is the settlement agreement we discussed. Once signed, the custody matter will be dropped and you'll receive the agreed-upon sum of $50,000. In exchange, you'll turn over all documents in your possession related to Parker family finances and cease all claims against the family." I glanced at the document without touching it. "I have a few questions." "Of course," Whitman said smoothly. "This agreement states I relinquish all claims as Florence Parker, but according to my investigation, I'm legally Florence Vasquez. Richard never formally adopted me after deporting my mother. Wouldn't that make this agreement invalid?" Richard's face tightened. "That's absurd. Of course I adopted you." "Really? Because county records..." Whitman placed a thick document on the table and slid it toward me. "This is the settlement agreement we discussed. Once signed, the custody matter will be dropped and you'll receive the agreed-upon sum of $50,000. In exchange, you'll turn over all documents in your possession related to Parker family finances and cease all claims against the family." I glanced at the document without touching it. I have a few questions before signing." "Of course," Whitman said smoothly. "This agreement states I relinquish all claims as Florence Parker, but according to my investigation, I'm legally Florence Vasquez. Richard never formally adopted me after deporting my mother. Wouldn't that make this agreement invalid?" Richard's face tightened. "That's absurd. Of course I adopted you." "Really? Because county records show no adoption was ever finalized, and my mother's journals document your admission that you never completed the process." Whitman cleared his throat. "Whatever the technicality, you've used the Parker name for years, for purposes of this agreement. And then there's the matter of my inheritance, the $200,000 plus interest that Maria left in trust for me, which Richard diverted to his personal accounts." "There was no inheritance," Richard snapped. "Maria had nothing." The Arizona Community Bank disagrees. They've provided complete documentation of the account Maria established, including records of Richard claiming the funds as my guardian, despite having no legal right to do so. Thomas leaned forward. "What game are you playing, Florence? You agreed to settle." "I agreed to a meeting," I corrected him. "And speaking of games, let's discuss the embezzlement from Parker Real Estate Development. $3 million diverted to offshore accounts over 15 years, plus systematic tax fraud that I unknowingly facilitated with the false information you provided me." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "That's enough. You have no proof of any of this, and no one would believe you over us anyway. You're just the maid's daughter trying to extort money from a respected family." I smiled for the first time. "You're right about one thing, Richard. I am the maid's daughter, and I'm proud of that now. Maria Vasquez was a brave woman who documented every injustice the Parker family committed, the worker exploitation, the unsafe conditions, the threats of deportation against vulnerable people. She kept journals, Richard, detailed journals." The color drained from Richard's face. Whitman looked between us, clearly realizing this wasn't proceeding as expected. "Perhaps we should recess." "No need," I interrupted, checking. Richard slammed his hand on the table. "That's enough. You have no proof of any of this, and no one would believe you over us anyway. You're just the maid's daughter trying to extort money from a respected family." I smiled for the first time. "You're right about one thing, Richard. I am the maid's daughter, and I'm proud of that now. Maria Vasquez was a brave woman who documented every injustice the Parker family committed, the worker exploitation, the unsafe conditions, the threats of deportation against vulnerable people. She kept journals, Richard, detailed journals." The color drained from Richard's face. Whitman looked between us, clearly realizing this wasn't proceeding as expected. "Perhaps we should recess?" "No need," I interrupted, checking my watch. "My associates should be arriving any moment." As if on cue, the door opened. Jane entered first, followed by two people in suits who introduced themselves as agents from the Department of Labor. Behind them came a representative from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, and finally a reporter from the Boston Globe who specialized in corporate crime investigations. "What is this?" Richard demanded, rising from his chair. "This," I said calmly, "is consequences." Jane took over, explaining that based on the evidence we'd compiled, federal investigations were being opened into Parker Real Estate Development for labor violations, tax fraud, and embezzlement. "The documentation speaks for itself," Jane replied. "Bank records don't lie, Mr. Parker. Neither do Maria's journals or the witnesses we've located, former workers who've confirmed the exploitation." Richard turned to me, his face twisted with a mix of rage and fear. "I raised you. I gave you the Parker name. And this is how you repay me? By trying to destroy everything our family has built?" "You didn't build it," I said quietly. "You stole it from the workers you exploited, from the investors you defrauded, from my mother whom you discarded. And now you're trying to hurt my son? That's where I draw the line." The next hours passed in a blur of formal statements, document reviews, and increasingly desperate attempts by Whitman to regain control of the situation. By afternoon, Richard and Thomas found themselves facing multiple federal investigations. Preliminary injunctions froze the Parker family assets pending the outcome. As we left the building, Jane squeezed my arm. "You did it, Florence. It's not over yet, but you've won the biggest battle." "Not yet," I replied. "There's one more thing I need to do." That evening, I visited Eleanor Parker, the family matriarch who had orchestrated Maria's deportation and had referred to Noah as the Maid'S kid. She received me in her immaculate living room, seemingly unaware of the day's events. Her surprise at my visit quickly morphed into disdain. "What are you doing here? Richard told me you've been causing trouble." "I wanted to talk to you directly," I said, taking a seat without waiting for an invitation. "About Maria Vasquez." Eleanor's expression hardened. That woman has been dead for years. What could possibly matter now? Justice matters. Truth matters. I placed my phone on the coffee table between us and pressed record, ensuring Eleanor was aware, as Massachusetts law required. "I know you reported Maria to immigration authorities when you discovered she was pregnant with Richard's child." "I know you orchestrated her deportation and the cover-up afterward. What I want to know is why you continued to punish me, a child who had no part in any of it." Eleanor studied me for a long moment before a cold smile crept across her face. "You really want to know? Because you were living proof of Richard's weakness. Because every time Patricia looked at you, she was reminded of her husband's betrayal. Because the maid thought she could climb above her station by having a Parker baby. Her casual cruelty was stunning. So you punished a child for existing? I protected this family. The Parker name means something in this town. We built this community. We couldn't have Richard's indiscretion undermining everything. We gave you a home, an education, opportunities most people would be grateful for. Instead, you've been scheming against us, just like your mother." "My mother was documenting your family's crimes," I corrected her, "and now her work is complete through me." I explained the federal investigations, the frozen assets, and the impending charges. With each revelation, Eleanor's composure cracked further. "You can't prove any of this," she finally said, though uncertainty had replaced her earlier arrogance. "Actually, I can, and there's one more thing. Noah is not the Maid's kid. He is Maria Vasquez's grandson. He is my son, and he has more integrity in his little finger than the entire Parker family combined." I stood to leave, but Eleanor called after me. "You'll regret this, Florence. You're nothing without the Parker name." I turned back with a genuine smile. "That's where you're wrong. I'm Maria Vasquez's daughter, and that's everything I need to be." 1 year later, I stood in the courthouse corridor awaiting the final sentencing in the case against Richard and Thomas Parker. The past 12 months had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media coverage, and personal transformation. Richard had pleaded guilty to multiple counts of tax fraud, embezzlement, and labor violations to avoid a public trial. Thomas, too, had accepted a plea deal for his involvement in the financial crimes. Today would determine their sentences. Eleanor had evaded criminal charges due to a lack of direct evidence linking her to the financial misconduct, but the civil penalties had decimated her wealth and social standing. The Parker name, once synonymous with power in our community, was now associated with corruption and exploitation. "Ready for this?" Jane asked, joining me outside the courtroom. Over the past year, she had transitioned from being my attorney to becoming my closest friend and ally. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. The sentencing was swift and severe. Richard received 8 years in federal prison, while Thomas was sentenced to 5. The judge also ordered full restitution to all victims, including the exploited workers and the investors who had been defrauded. As we left the courthouse, reporters clamored for comments. I provided a brief statement about justice being served, but my thoughts were already elsewhere, with Noah, who was waiting at home with Lucia. Home was different now. With the recovery of my inheritance and the settlement from the civil case against the Parkers, Noah and I had moved to a comfortable house in a new neighborhood. More importantly, we had found peace. Noah had undergone therapy to process the trauma of the previous year. Initially, he struggled with confusion about his family identity and the loss of relationships with his cousins. But children are remarkably resilient, especially with honest, age-appropriate explanations and the steady love of his new extended family, particularly Lucia, who delighted in her role as great aunt. Noah had truly blossomed. "Are the bad guys going to jail?" he asked when I returned home that day. "Yes," I answered simply. "They did wrong things, and now they have to face the consequences." He considered this with the seriousness that only an 8-year-old can muster, like when I broke Mrs. Wilson's window playing baseball and had to use my allowance to help pay for it. I smiled, recognizing the parallel. Similar, but much bigger mistakes. My professional life had transformed as well. Utilizing my accounting expertise and first-hand knowledge of corporate fraud, I had established a consulting firm specializing in ethical business practices and worker protections. Companies hired us to ensure their operations remained compliant with labor laws and financial regulations. But my most meaningful work came through the Maria Vasquez Foundation, which I had created with a portion of the settlement funds. The foundation provided legal assistance and support to undocumented workers facing exploitation, along with educational scholarships for their children. As December approached once more, Noah began asking about our Christmas plans. The previous year's holiday had triggered the events that changed our lives forever, and I wanted to create new, joyful traditions. "Can Aunt Lucia come for Christmas?" he asked eagerly. "And can we make those special cookies? She told me about the ones my grandmother used to make." "Buñuelos," I said, smiling at his enthusiasm. "Yes, Aunt Lucia will be here, and she's bringing photos and stories about your grandmother Maria." "Will we see Aunt Amanda and her kids?" he asked cautiously. This was more complicated. Amanda, unlike her mother and father, had reached out after the truth emerged. She claimed ignorance of the worst of the family's crimes and expressed remorse for her role in ostracizing Noah and me. After months of careful steps, we had established a fragile new relationship, not the forced family connection the Parkers had maintained, but something potentially more authentic. "They might visit for a little while," I told him. The holiday arrived with a gentle snowfall that transformed our new neighborhood into a winter wonderland. Our home filled with the comforting sense of traditional cooking as Lucia taught Noah and me to make the recipes that Maria had cherished. The dining room table was adorned with photographs of Maria at various ages, my way of ensuring Noah understood his heritage and the remarkable woman whose courage had ultimately led to our freedom. Amanda visited briefly with her children. The interaction was awkward but civil. Her wife, Jessica, had been more genuinely apologetic, admitting she had always felt uncomfortable with how the family treated me, but had lacked the courage to speak up. Her remorse seemed sincere, and for Noah's sake, I was willing to explore the possibility of some relationship moving forward. As evening fell, Lucia raised her glass in a toast to Maria, who watches over us, to Florence, who finished what her mother began, and to Noah, who will carry forward a legacy of truth and justice. Later, as Noah slept surrounded by new Christmas presents, I sat by the window watching the snowfall. The year had brought pain and struggle, but also clarity and purpose. I was no longer defined by the Parker name or by what had been done to me. I was Florence Vasquez, Maria's daughter, Noah's mother, and my own person. The journey wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, helping Noah navigate his complex family history as he grew older, continuing to build the foundation's work, and perhaps even someday finding room in my heart for new relationships. But for the first time in my life, I faced the future without fear or shame. I felt secure in the knowledge that I had discovered my true strength and identity. My phone pinged with a text message from Jane. "Thinking of you today. Proud of everything you've accomplished this year. Here's to new beginnings." I smiled and replied, "New beginnings indeed. Thank you for helping me find my way." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the old year's pain with a clean white blanket of possibility. What would you do if someone publicly humiliated your child? Would you have handled things differently than Florence did? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might need to hear that standing up for yourself and your children is always worth it, no matter how powerful the opposition seems. Thank you for listening to my story today, and I wish you all the courage to face your own battles with the same determination that Florence found within herself.